What I'm going to do is start by one or two tiny stories. This story is about a former student at University College who lived out in the suburbs, and he used to come in by tube every morning, and he would go to the ticket office and he'd ask for a ticket to the nearest station to UCL Road, right? And every time he asked for it, they gave him a ticket instead to Kensington High Street. Well, so he confessed this terrible happening to his teacher. The teacher said, well, say it exactly as you say it to these people. And he said, a ticket to Tottenham Court Road. Ah, now there's only one central station on the tube system that has that rhythm. And that is not Tottenham Court Road, which you're misstressing, but Kensington High Street. Another example of a rhythm was a lecturer in Indian studies, Indology as he called it. And he spoke beautiful English, excellent, very clear, very sophisticated. But one day he said to me, he began the sentence with, "Burglary." And of course I didn't understand that. And I was wondering what in heaven's name he had said. So I don't remember the rest of the sentence he said. I kept wondering about it until after a little while I realized what he'd done wrong. He put the stress in the wrong place. Now he spoke quite fast, but if he hadn't got anything wrong other than the stress, then I would have understood him perfectly right. And this is a joke that I've heard from a comedian on the radio. It's always stuck in my mind because it's such an excellent joke, because it has a moral, a real helpful purpose, because it reminds you that one of the main things you have to do in studying spoken English is to listen very carefully to yourself all the time. In other words, to monitor yourself. And the joke is this. A woman went into a smart restaurant, sat down at the table by herself, and a smart waiter came over, with a little napkin over his arm, and said, "Good evening, madam, what can I get you?" And she looked at the menu and she said, "Well, first I'll have kidney soup." "I beg your pardon, madam, I believe you mean kidney soup. Is that right?" She said, "Well, I said kidney, did I?" In other words, she wasn't monitoring her output, right? But she didn't get the end in the right place. Kiddly, diddle I. Now, why are weak forms and contractions so important? What is a weak form? There's a definition of it, a reduced form of a word with a different set of phonemes. That's phonologically different. It's not just shorter, quieter, softer, whatever it is. It's got different phonemes, which is, of course, a very fundamental thing in linguistic analysis. And there are 40 or so words in English. Now, fortunately for you, thousands and thousands of words in English have reduced form. Thousands of them have weak forms, right? But you can forget all about them, because all those weak forms in those other words are optional, but not in the 40 that we're going to talk about mainly this morning. The 40 or so this morning are not optional, because if you depart from them, don't use them in the proper place, then you change the whole style of what you're saying, and perhaps the message completely. So these words, the stylistically distinctive variants, they provide the grammatical structure of the sentences. I'm now going to demonstrate what it sounds like if you say a couple of sentences, quite ordinary sentences, without any weak forms. You can see these are the sentences I've been saying, but it'll take more than an hour and a half for me to go into town to get the cash from our bank, so they can have the money as quickly as possible. Tell us what they're asking us to give them at least, right? So that's what a normal native speaker would say. Now look at what happens to very many beginners, at least, in learning English. They say, "But it will take more than an hour and a half for me to go into town to get the cash from our bank, so that they can have some money as soon as possible. Tell us what they are asking us to give them. Give them at the least." Now that sounds bizarre. I admit it's an extreme version. Fortunately, you don't do anything quite as bad as that as a rule, but that's the kind of thing you tend to do if you don't include weak forms. So there's once again transcribed for you the natural bit saying, "It'll take me more than an hour and a half for me to go into town to get the cash from our bank, so that they can have some money as quickly as possible. Tell us what they're asking us to give them at the least." That's what it should be like. Now, I'm going to give you some more examples to try. See, my whole job now is I'm not going to teach you the English weak forms. I haven't got time to do that in this lecture. I've given you 2 sheets, and one sheet contains a list of the weak form words and all the contractions, all the common contractions. So you can start learning it from that when you're ready, right? But I'm not going to go through that with you. It would take too much time and it'd be very boring, right? So I'm going to take some examples of where misunderstandings can or have taken place by failure to use weak forms. And the first one I have here, number 1, is I'm giving him a painting that I shall have done by Christmas. Now that's one way of saying it. And the other way of saying it is this. I'm giving him a painting that I shall have done by Christmas. And in fact, you probably, the majority of you here, didn't hear any difference between those 2 sentences. But to a native English speaker who is very sensitive to use of weak forms, he would be perfect here in his mind that one of those sentences meant that the person speaking was the painter, and the other sentence, the other way of saying it, with the particular weak form, with or without, he'd be quite sure that the person wasn't doing the painting. The speaker wasn't the painter. Now, have you any idea what it is? Where does the difference come? That's a question to ask. Where's the giveaway point in that sentence? Well, it is the word have. Because the word have can have 2 meanings. It can be what it is 9 times out of 10, an auxiliary verb, right? Used to conjugate a verb, used to conjugate the word do here, have done. Or it can be a causative verb, meaning I cause something to be done. And so if you say it's something I shall have done by Christmas, I'm having it done. I'm having somebody else do it, not me. Or I shall have done, I'll do it myself. So that's one big misunderstanding you get. Now, the second one comes from that famous book, Intonation of Colloquial English by Common Arnold. It's very well arranged, that book, in that it always has an introductory remark and then another remark, usually from another speaker, which demonstrates the intonation that they're paying attention to. Now the first remark then is, these books are awful, right? Fine. And then follows, well, now I have to say it in 2 ways. 2 of them are all right, or 2 of them are all right. Now 2 of them are all right is the one that needs the comma, right? Because the comma separates off 2 separate clauses, really. 2 of them are all right means I agree with you that the books are awful. The person replying hasn't read more than 2. Or the other one is 2 of them are all right with no pause. See, a pause at the comma is only potential. We don't pause at every comma. Commas are used largely in written English to point out the grammar of the sentence. So we don't necessarily make any adjustment of our pace of speaking to include them. Well, how's the problem there? Well, if you say 2 of them are all right, I agree with you. 2 of them are. They are awful. The other one is 2 of them are all right. I disagree with you. I've read 2 of them and they're fine. Right? So total difference of meaning, just depending where the are ends its clause. Weak form with ending a clause is usually too prominent to be weakened. But when all right is the complement, not a separate adverbial phrase, then the weak form would be used, or all right. Professor Wells has talked about compression as well as me. We probably use different examples each time, and sometimes we may use the same example. This is quite similar to one that Michael Ashby used. I've known it 4 weeks and he's known it 4 months. Now, that is the way that the form without the numeral, with the word for, F-O-R, would be said by most beginners in learning English. And if that was said to a native English speaker, I've known it 4 weeks, but he'd known it 4 months, they would take it to mean the numeral 9 times out of 10, right? Because we never pronounce the word for when it's weakened, when it's any prepositional position in front of a noun. We never say it in that full form for, unless we're stressing it, which would be very unusual. So that would be a misunderstanding. It's perfectly possible. And then there's another one. This is a children's riddle, if you like. When a cock's hungry, it goes back 4 seconds, right? Well, if you say it with the strong form, then it's the new one. It's the number of seconds it goes slow, if you like. But actually, to go back for seconds is a typical children's expression when they have school dinners and everybody's been served once, then perhaps the people serving the food will say, anybody wants seconds, anybody wants a second helping, in other words. And so to go back for seconds, of course, is to go back and have some more food. Okay. Any more? Yes, he's going too fast and he's going too fast, right? To fast can be a verb meaning to abstain from food, and too fast, of course, can be at an excessive speed, exceeding the speed on the motorway or whatever it is. So that can, if pronounced with the strong form, to will be interpreted as the adverb, T-double-O, instead of the weak form t of the, when they haven't used the weak form t of the preposition. The 5 prepositions, at, for, from, of, and to, all frequently have weak forms, typically have weak forms. Now, number 6. I was 18 months before I could walk. I was 2. Now, if you say I was 2 and give the strong form of was, then that means it's a separate clause. I was. I also was 18 months before I could walk. But if you say I was 2, then was is now a weak form, and now obviously the word to is connected with it in a different way. It now is numeral. I was 2 means I was 2 years old. I was more than 18 months. And by the way, one of the things that is English idioms, if you like, one of the things we don't say in English is a year and a half, right? We always say 18 months instead, normally. So anyway, there it is. Not a year and a half, but 18 months. 1 year, 2 years, and in between 18 months. Right. Now, here's the one I think that Michael gave the other day. Which train are you taking? Well, or plane are you taking? If somebody says the 2210, right? Well, meaning to say 2210, meaning 9:40, if he says 2210 when he means 9:40, it's in great danger of being misinterpreted as the 24-hour clock. 2210 means 10 past 10. And my 8th example, when I was on the staff of the University of Leeds, I taught a number of students, and one of them came in one morning and said that his friend had offended their landlady. I said, well, what did he say? Well, he asked for bread and butter. And of course the landlady thought that he was hinting, or perhaps even asserting, that she was giving him bread with no butter on it. In other words, she was so mean, put so little butter on, that it was practically no butter there. So we had to say bread and butter. Now, he didn't actually stress the word and, probably, but if he said it in its strong form, it would sound virtually stressed. So it was no wonder she took offense, right? And the last little example is, a funny way we use the word that. When we don't like a person, when we refer to a person we disapprove of or dislike, we often call him that John, or that Michael, or that Jack, you know. So here we are, I bet that John told them. This means that one we all hate, you know. In other words, it's quite different meaning from aspect of John, with John, the relative. There are 2 words that in English, T-H-A-T, both spelled the same, of course. One that always has schwa, and is a relative. One that, it always has the clear vowel a, and it's a demonstrative. Okay. Finally, I hope, you see, what my job I have to do today is not to teach you how to use the weak forms, but to make you aware of the necessity of using them so that you study them yourself, so you take account of them. And I find some students become very enthusiastic after I've given a talk of this sort, and they try to use weak forms all the time on all sorts of words we don't have weak forms for. And, we've got 5 prepositions that have weak forms. Right, they're going to make all the prepositions into weak forms. And they make the word on and the words in into weak forms. But we don't normally use a weak form on or in, and there are other words like that. Now, in this case, there's the word some. And I've heard a student say, when I give him the sentence to read aloud, Father's bringing home some missionary for dinner. Now, it's a very good thing to be aware that the word some, when it's weak, And when in front of a word, it usually refers to a quantity, like some money, some sugar, and so on. When it's in that form, it doesn't even have any vowels, just some, right? Good, then bear that in mind. But the word some has two senses. In some cases, it means not just an amount of, but a particular one. A one that you don't know the name of, say, so you have to refer to some person, some thing, whatever it is. So, what about this sentence then? Father's bringing home some missionary for dinner. Well, it could only have been uttered by a cannibal, couldn't it, right? So be careful about that. Now, what I'm going on to now is just the most ordinary kinds of sentences that anybody has to use constantly in everyday speech. And you'll see that they are things that people repeatedly get wrong. I'm going to just read these out for you now, but I can tell you this, that if I ask you round the class now to read them to me, most of you get most of them wrong, many of them wrong. The ice is melting, what does that do? When am I expected? What have we got? Give them to them. How many people say give them to them instead of give them to them? It sounds absolutely terrible, like a machine speaking, you know. It sounds like one of these mechanical things that can't adjust to normal rhythms. When had he caught it? I should have spent it. That'll do. How many had he had? Has he had his hair cut? That sort of thing. Now, how many had he had is a very common sentence, because very often people who had a very nice evening drinking at the pub, one of their number perhaps had got rather the worse for wear, as we say, rather drunk, right? And then people talking about his condition last night will ask how many pints of beer had he drunk, right? And they say how many had he had. And I've hardly ever found any student of mine who hasn't had it pointed out to him that we would use weak forms in the way we do in that sentence. It's extremely often got wrong. So there it is. I'm afraid some of my phonetic symbols aren't coming out very well on this machine, but there we are. Right. So that's weak form words. You've got a list of them there. There are about 40, just over 40 of them. The last two on your list, this is the back of the demonstrations paper. The last two on that list apply only to British usage. Americans don't say sunt or sir, they say saint and sir instead. But all the others we tend to agree. In fact, this is one of the other important facts about the weak form. It doesn't matter what accent of English you use. 99% of all native speakers of English will make these reductions, right? It's very, very few varieties of English that have fewer weak forms than the ones mentioned here. They may have extra ones. I can think of about one dialect of English that had a lot fewer weak forms, relatively speaking, than the standard forms. Ordinary American English and ordinary British English have practically the same thing. I mean, you can hear American politicians say, give them, instead of give them, right? Sometimes. But even most Americans don't do that. If you can hear in this country, for a person to say give them to would be absolutely unbelievable. So, I'm going to tell you about weak form compounds in a moment. But there's your list of weak forms, and here's your list of contractions with them. I'm not going to go through the whole lot with you or anything like that, but you can see that if you look carefully at the two transcriptions, there's a normal spelling and an informal spelling, which gives you a clue to the fact that we don't normally say those words in that right-hand column in the way they are. A lot of the 34. In fact, an interesting statistic that I once worked out about this is that of these words, there are about 100. If you put these two lists together, there are about 100 or less. And of the words we use in ordinary conversation, I went through a number of conversations, 1,000 or so more words, and I found that every fourth word was on that list, on those two lists. Every fourth word was either a weak form word or a contraction. So that's a huge quantity, 25% of all the words you ever use if you're carrying on an ordinary everyday conversation. So it makes them very worthwhile taking notice of. So there you are, the weak form compounds. And I'm going to go on from there. Well, I've given you that statistic here. And I'm going on now to talk about rhythm a bit more. And one of the effects, you see, of not using the weak forms that we properly do is that you don't go smoothly over the things we try to avoid stressing. And you make your English too easily sound rattling. I call the kind of speech you get in English pouncing. We go smoothly over the things that are unimportant and pounce heavily on the things we feel are important, the syllables we think need stressing. Whereas some other languages, some to an extreme extent, languages like French and Spanish in particular, but most other languages are more in the rattling side of things than English is. English is an extreme pouncing language. And if you rattle, then you sound, well, I invented one English sentence that does rattle by accident, if you like. Here it is. He deposited a packet of cricket tickets in his jacket ticket pocket. Now, that does not sound like a normal English speaker. It's a very rare kind of sentence. So, he deposited a packet of cricket tickets in his jacket ticket pocket. Some other mistakes that can occur and so on. If you say, don't take it too hard, and use the strong form of the word to, right, then you don't sound like an Englishman at all. You sound like an American saying, don't drink that tea too hot, you know, because Americans pronounce the word heart. They say heart, meaning H-O-T, hot. So you sound, if you say don't take it too hard, as if you're speaking American English and talking about how hot something is, but don't take it to heart is a sympathetic remark in British English, meaning don't get upset by it, don't dwell on the idea. And another example, this again it's a writer of lyrics of songs making a joke out of our weak form system, our contracted form system. And this one I have to sing to you, I suppose. It's I'm biding my time, because that's the kind of guy I'm. Now, nobody would say that's the kind of guy I'm. They have to say the kind of guy I am, right? But of course, the joke is that he gets a rhyme out of it by distorting the English language. Because one of the funny things I've heard is I've heard a particular singer who did a recording of this, and he loses the rhyme. He ignores the joke and says, because that's the kind of guy I am. Well, that's not what Ira Gershwin intended on that occasion. He was producing what we call an outrageous rhyme. Okay, well, I think that's about all I really need to do directly on the subject of weak forms and contractions. And now I'm going to use the rest of the time I've got to demonstrate to you some of the features of English and what they contribute. So first of all then, we can ask ourselves various questions, and I'm not sure the answer to some of these questions, but how important is intonation, for instance, right? Now, I think intonation is very badly taught in most places, very inadequately dealt with, if not forgotten altogether. Fortunately, on this course, a good deal of attention is paid to it, not with an ideal system of analysis of it, but with one that nobody's found a better one for yet. We'll be eagerly looking forward to this new book by Professor Wells on English intonation, see if he's improved on the common noun system in some way. I'm going to ask you to listen to me reading from some texts. And the first one I'm going to choose is, I'm going to say completely normal English in every other way, except that I am using no intonation, right? Now, the point is, will you fail to understand me or will you understand? I think you'll understand quite well. And I put the one tone I'm using right at the beginning, it's that tone, the high level tone, and I stay on it practically all the way. Poor unfortunate monks and nuns in their holy monasteries and convents must inevitably get so terribly bored with chanting or singing the whole of the time at just one and the same single pitch level that most usually, if only at the very end of whatever it is they are singing, they finish by managing to incorporate into it briefly at least a very slight change of pitch. So, my second demonstration, I'm going to use only one single vowel consonant, right? Now, you know there are in English quite a lot of vowels. We count that we've got 20 vowels. We've got 12 simple vowels here, and we've got a diphthong. Well, I'm going to read to you now something that only uses one vowel quality. Now, that vowel quality is extraordinary in a way that it's the only pair of phonemes in English that are distinguished solely by length, right? All the others have length and some other feature, but length is the only thing that keeps apart and right? They are made with exactly the same tongue position. So here we go. Then let's see what this sounds like. It's perfectly possible for anybody to talk English in a very understandable manner for a considerable length of time without causing much difficulty at all to those who are listening to them, even though they're making use of only a single vowel quality. Only one vowel quality. Now, the rhythm and the intonation were preserved, so you largely understood what I was saying. It sounds very blurred, perhaps, but you could follow it. Now, I'm going to go further than that. The next thing I'm going to do is use only one quality again, and only one consonant. Now, I have a full load of consonants in what I was just saying, but now I'm going to say something with only one tone and only one vowel, and only one consonant. Here it is then. Now that, I think, is incomprehensible to anybody, right? Anybody. That completely removes what we need to follow it. But now, what if I say it with the normal intonation? Now, quite a few native speakers would recognize that, because it's very well known. You already know it, but I expect very few of you did recognize it. Anyway, I'm going to do more of it. This time, I'm going to add more. And my next set of reductions will mean that I take out most of the consonants of English, right? See the ones I put in black? I'm leaving out altogether. I'm keeping the ones in red. Notice Japanese speakers, by the way, that la and ra I can't do without that contrast, right? It's important in English sort of comprehensibility. So I'm going to keep both L and R, but all the other consonants I'm leaving out, so I've only got 10 consonants altogether. And again, I'm only using one vowel quality, right? So here we are. Let's see what this sounds like now. I hope you hear me all right. It was a word is done. It everywhere the better word, the love was sure to go. Now, that may seem equally incomprehensible with all the rest I've said to most of you, but I would think that most native English speakers would recognize what it was straight away from the intonation and rhythmic pattern. The rhythm gives that terrific amount of information. And I'll give you one or two more things like that. Jack and John would have the Earl, the vegetable word. Jack will do the frugal bread, a shell of Dublin. Now, anybody want to tell me what either of those was? The first one was Mary Had a Little Lamb. And the second one was Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. And here's another one. The vegetable was bird. The government was bird, and so the bird. Now, some bits of that would be completely unrecognizable on their own, but taken together, most native English speakers who have had that kind of nursery rhyme in childhood, most of us had, would recognize that was Old Mother Hubbard went to Cumberland to fetch the poor dog home. Right, now that's nursery rhymes. I'm going to give you a little famous piece of English poetry now. Right, here we go. A word is learned as a bird, and blurred the dirt of a bird is earth. So that it was as a bird, a dirt of gilded daffodils. And now, if any native speaker hadn't got it until the last word, they would certainly got daffodils as a distortion of daffodils, right? As William Wordsworth's poem Daffodils. Then the beginning of the Lord's Broth. As well as goes of justice against this. But delivered revival, and then the bird of the globe, that was the Lord's Prayer. Right? Now, I've got one other little thing I'd like to demonstrate to you, and this is again unusual English. And I don't necessarily expect, I think you will in fact follow this quite well. But what it tells us is that if we're familiar with something in some way, we can understand it far better than if it's completely unexpected. And this is, in fact, this is something I'm in a way doing in honour of Professor John Wells, who, as you know, is retiring this year. And I've already read this to his colleagues, who seem quite interested in it. Anyway, it's a piece that John wrote down in 1967 from the dictation, if you like, or taking down the speech of a Jamaican Creole woman who had never gone from her village in Jamaica all her life, and she was in her late 20s or something. Anyway, it's a story that I think you will recognize. It's called CINDERELLA, which is the way she pronounces Cinderella, right? And I have to warn you that there's a word mother-in-law comes in it. And Cinderella's mother-in-law, well, we would say in modern English, stepmother, not mother-in-law. But here it is. Cinderella mother died, and her father married a new wife. The wife brought home 2 children with her, 2 girls. Cinderella mother-in-law put her outside in the kitchen to do all the cooking, the washing, and the cleaning. And the 2 girls that she brought home with her, she dressed them up every day. One day, the king gave out that he is going to have a dance. Cinderella mother-in-law dressed up her 2 daughters and sent them off to the dance. Leave Cinderella at home. Cinderella cried. A fairy came and dressed Cinderella, put her into golden slippers, glittering dress, and gave her a buggy to ride. When Cinderella reached the ball, the king's son came out and escorted her in, and the king's son never want anyone else to dance with but Cinderella. But the fairy tells Cinderella that she must be sure that when the clock strikes 1, she must be at home back. And when the hour was coming, the king's son did not want to let her go. Cinderella has to resist and pull away, and she loses one of her slippers. In the morning, the king's son sent out men to search for the girl that lost the slipper. Everywhere they go, they tried the slipper, it couldn't fit. No one. When they reached Cinderella mother-in-law yard, all that them do, it couldn't fit them. The man asked if there is anyone else in the yard. Them said, no, it's only a little dirty girl outside the door. The man said, fetch her. And when them bring Cinderella, Cinderella just put her toe to the slipper, it slipped right in. And Cinderella just turn her hand behind her and take the other one. And the fairy dress up Cinderella, and the man take home Cinderella, and the king's son married to Cinderella, and leave the 2 girls at home still. That's it. Thank you. Any questions? You're welcome.